In my world there is music and good vibes and laughter and lovers, adventure and friendship. We know who we are. And I don't think I would be me without you being you. Your direction, expression, intention has taken us far.
Hello and welcome everyone to Be the Wellness Podcast, episode number 20. Adam Lambert here with Vanessa Lambert on the other side of the Skype.
Yes, I'm here.
And we're doing this. So we've been having a little bit of audio Skype problems. So if it's a little garbly, we apologize in advance.
Yes. Advanced hopefully accepted.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I guess I'll just jump right in and talk a little bit about what we are looking to focus on today, which is kind of going back to the basics. So we know a lot of folks out there have been with us since the beginning, but there are also a bunch of newcomers to the program that, you know, most likely you've gone back and you've listened to some of the archives of the podcast and you're pretty much up to speed. But we wanted to kind of just start anew and sort of get regrounded and refocused on what this program's all about, especially being in a new season and in summer season for the Northern Hemisphere. It's kind of great to get regrounded and refocused on the intention behind this program and sort of the ethos of it, if you will.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So, and you know, one of the reasons we wanted to do this is because it's really easy to get hung up on, you know, getting sort of tunnel vision on what you're doing for your wellness program. And especially when it comes to going paleo and including these kind of ancestral health eating type strategies, a lot of times people start to feel, you know, like they have some friction between their friends and family members, and they start to deal with this sort of gray area of, you know, well, how do I exist in this wellness picture without really having to, you know, damage some of my existing relationships? Or how do I keep people feeling comfortable with what I'm doing without alienating them? You know, and there's a lot of this kind of social stuff that goes along with making wellness changes in your life.
Yeah. I mean, just like sort of any sort of change, it's, people who are not necessarily on board are apt to feel like you're, you know, because you've changed something, now you're going to judge them or something, you know?
Right. And, you know, I know many of us have had friends where there are junk food friends, or there are party friends, or there are whatever friends that once you stop doing some of those things, you start realizing that the basis of your friendship obviously, you know, wasn't maybe primarily focused on the fact that you go, you know, do your Friday night binges at
Mr. Lucky's.
Wherever it is. Yeah. But, you know, you start to realize that by making these changes, you know, maybe start to feel like you're alienating your friends, or your friends feel like you're alienating them. So the one thing we wanted to just first focus on today was that this is about helping people find their own path. And there's no right or wrong way to figure it out or to navigate how to include some of these wellness strategies in your life. And, you know, one of the issues that I've had with paleo over the years is that people start to become sort of paleo elitists, and they do almost start looking down on other people like, well, if you're not paleo, then you don't know what you're talking about, or your way of doing it is wrong. Right. And, you know, that I'm sure, you know, to a certain degree, you kind of have to have that stick-to-itiveness or that true belief that this is the way to live in order to stick with it for a while. But after you've been doing it for a while, it's kind of like just really annoying for people. If
you're evangelical about it, right?
Yes,
which is what you mean, I think, right? Where you're constantly talking about this stuff. You know, it's like, oh, you go to a barbecue, right? Like the summer barbecue, and you show up, and instead of just, you know, bringing whatever it is that you want to eat with whatever sort of dry rub or sauce, you make a point of saying, I don't eat white bread and buns, and I brought gluten-free sauce because you guys are all, glutinous, anti-nutrient consuming, nincompoops who bought into the, savages, bought into the conventional wisdom, and obviously that's an extreme case, but.
Yeah, but actually I see it, especially being part of this wellness world, we actually end up finding that a lot of people do become very evangelical about it. And we understand to a certain degree, these things change your life and you're so excited, and you've maybe have had illnesses that you've overcome, or you've had situations that are very much improved because of the way that you're eating and the way that you're living your life now. But you have to understand that not everybody's in that place. Not everybody's open to hearing you spout how great this diet is or how great this lifestyle is. Not everybody wants to hear it or is open to hearing it at the same time.
Right.
So, it's just some.
Yeah, and it's entirely possible that the route that you took or the path that worked for you may not actually even be the best thing for them. And that's why this sorting out, helping people sort out what is right for them and the best for them is really the focus that that we've tried to bring to this program, where we're not standing in judgment of someone else's path. What we're trying to do is help them, find what that is by sharing our knowledge and experience,
Absolutely. And, letting people know that, hey, we've been talking about this over the last couple of weeks, that maybe being the lowest carb person on the planet isn't necessarily the right approach for every single individual. And maybe, trying to get 1 gram per pound of lean body mass of protein isn't right for every single individual. This is really about finding your own truth, finding your own wellness picture, and fine-tuning it over the course of a year or 2 years in your lifetime.
Yeah. Yeah. And something that's sustainable and cool. And I think, I think this is where everybody ends up over time, and I think we kind of talked about this a little bit, maybe on the last podcast or the one before, but just know that it is a journey, and the way that you feel about it right now and the excitement and the things that in your heart of hearts are true may change over the course of your experience in dialing yourself in, So
absolutely. And it's like everyone is open to hearing about your experience at different times. And, we talked about this recently, where you may have friends or family that are actually ill, and you think that this type of lifestyle or this type of eating could help them heal. And, you're probably right. Most of the time, this kind of diet can help a lot of different ailments out there. But not everybody's open to it. Not everybody's ready to hear it. Not everybody has the same value system about healing themselves a natural way or through their food. It's not time for everybody yet, and that's okay.
Yeah, yeah. It's so frustrating. I mean, it can be so frustrating when you, at least in your own mind, know that you have at least, it may not be 100% the answer, but you've got 90% of the answer just in some simple lifestyle changes. And it can be super frustrating when people aren't ready to hear that. But man, if there's one thing that we've learned through this process, is that exactly what Vanessa was just saying. I mean, there's times that people are not ready to hear it. And, you can just frustrate yourself to no end, No more stress response.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, if you actually just make the changes within your own life, you find the path that works for you, that speaks so much louder than going out and, being really aggressive about your message towards everyone. Eventually people will look at you and go, wow, what's going on with you? You look amazing. You look happy. You look healthy. You might have lost some weight. Like, what's happening here? And, people will come to you naturally and ask you about your experience. And they still may not be open to changing it for themselves, but at least they're asking you, they're wanting to hear about your experience, and it's not being force fed upon them. So, it's one of those things that is really tricky to balance, because I know so many of us have seen so many wonderful changes, and I used to get really frustrated within my own family or friends when people would ask me over and over and over, what are you doing? What are you doing? And I would tell them and I would tell them, and they would still not make any changes.
Right.
And, that can be a really futile existence.
Yeah. Well, and then you get that must be so nice for you that, that works. And you're like, what?
Right.
Right. It would work for you too. It's just, you have to actually do it. Yeah.
Or that you can afford it, or that, you're privileged enough to be able to do it, and these are all different sort of spin-offs of the same issue. And that's the fact that people just aren't ready for it. If you're really ready for it and you really have a sense that this can make a difference in your life, then you'll make a way to make it work. There are people who live this way on a budget. There are people that live this way with a lot of obstacles between them and success, and they still manage to navigate it. So, just the only reason that we really wanted to talk about this is that, we're about halfway through the year, and probably a lot of you are starting to see some of these issues arise or have already dealt with them and are starting to recognize, wow, this is something that's making a big impact in my life, but I have to learn now how to exist in this new existence.
Right. With still not alienating all your relationships. Exactly. So anyhow, if there's any advice that we can give you is, just live in your truth, keep taking one step at a time towards your own wellness picture, and lead with love, because at the end of the day, love and compassion is going to be the most important energy that you give out to your community and give out to your friends. And I don't mean that in a trite, like, oh, well, I feel so sorry. Oh, bless her heart. Right. If only she'd listen to me. Right. I mean that in a truly accepting way towards the people that you love. Accept that they are where they are in their journey, and they may not even make it in this lifetime. They may not even make it to the place that you wish they could, because it just may not be their destiny, or it may not be what's meant for their soul, or whatever your spiritual and religious beliefs are. It just may not happen this time around, and you can't hold yourself hostage over it. You have to really honor that each soul has its own path, and you can't control or dictate it. Bam.
So
to recap.
It's interesting because, like, I'm really, really into this stuff, and I get annoyed with people when they talk too much about it. Yeah.
Well, and we walk that other line too, where it's our business. You know what I mean? So we talk about it all the time. And then, you go out to dinner with somebody and they're like, oh, so what do you do? We're like, oh, we have this wellness company. And they're like, oh, have you ever heard of paleo? And you're like, oh, no. How did this happen? Like, we specifically went to Waffle House to avoid this.
That's
fictitious statement.
Yeah. We did go there one time when we were in New Orleans for Mardi Gras.
I've been to Louisiana twice, and I went to a Waffle House both times.
That's what you do when you're in Louisiana.
Well, they're like Starbucks. I mean, it's the only, they're everywhere. And at 4 a.m, it's like the only place open. Yeah.
Well, when you go hard, sometimes Waffle House is the only option.
That's just what's up. Yeah.
This is true. This is our business, and we almost swing the other way, where sometimes we shy away from talking about it with people because the next thing you know, people want to debate it with you, or they want to have, this complex conversation about what they should do personally. And you're like, hey man, I'm just trying to eat my waffles.
Yep. I'm just trying to have a gluten-free waffle over here. Yeah. No, it's true. And I mean, we could just go on and on about this stuff, but I mean, the longer you're in the business, whether you're actually in the business or if you're just in the business of sorting it out for yourself, like, the more you realize the nuance and how just incredibly different everyone's personal, I think Sisson says it about the best way. He talks about your own personal complex equation. Yeah. And it's true. It's like, it's still math, so all of the basic tenets of math still apply, but it's your complex, situation that you've got to sort out, So anyway, you can just get really very quickly drug into the nuance.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just good to sort of remind yourself of, the reason that you're here and the reason that you're doing this is for yourself. It is so that you can be the best version of yourself that you can be. And I'm not even against like a little bit of ego getting involved here and there, because the ego can be a very powerful tool. It can help, sometimes just, I want to look good is the motivation that keeps you on the straight and narrow towards actually a better wellness picture. But it's about balancing it out and recognizing when you are starting to be that annoying paleo person that everyone's like, please don't invite them again.
I've all of a sudden feel bad about eating cornbread.
I feel bad about myself when they're around.
Which, if that's just an after effect of them basking in your glorious glow, then that's fine. But if you're imposing it on them, it's a different story.
Yeah, exactly. If your complexion shines so brightly, it makes people feel pale in comparison, then that's not your fault.
Good for you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't hate me because I'm beautiful.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So
funny.
Anyhow, I know that this is kind of a little bit going back to the basics about just the intention and everything, but it's good to remind yourself of where you are in your process and why you're here. And, this is the beautiful thing about Unveil Your Wellness. Everyone in this feed is more than happy to talk about your personal paleo equation. And that's the beautiful thing. And that's why we created this, is so that we have each other. We have a place that's safe for us to go and talk about it. And we don't have to feel like somebody's going to be off put by the subject matter, or, you're going to run into a rogue vegetarian who isn't excited about your particular path. And, this is the place where we can share our knowledge and we can share our experience and we can feel safe to do so. But, hopefully we can even help each other navigate how to integrate this into our outside world a little bit easier and more streamlined as possible too.
Yeah. Yeah. 'Cause it's a real thing.
It is.
That the integration is a real thing.
It is. Absolutely.
So, another thing. That? Yeah. That's that.
Yeah.
So another thing I wanted to talk a little bit about is, because as you all have noticed, the intensity of the workouts, even though the volume is down, the intensity is up, and some of you are feeling that these work rest ratios are allowing you to A, use a heavier weight, or B, go harder. And what you're seeing is that there's a pretty spicy response to that whole thing, right? And which is cool, and that's the intent. But we just want to really sort of put this all in a little bit of context here, because the last thing that we want to do is burn anybody out.
Right.
And it certainly can and most likely will happen if you're not careful about what you're eating, and whether or not you're eating some carbohydrate for the amount of intensity and stuff. So I just wanted to kind of cover a little bit of that as sort of a recap, and then also just throw out that, some of you we've been working with for quite a while now. And so there's been some very specific answers to questions that people are asking in the feed, because we've been working with you for a while now. And it's like, hey, no, this is what you should do, and we just know now based on our relationships with people. So, just when you're reading through the feed and you're taking a look at some of this stuff, just try to keep that in mind, that the context that we're talking about with that specific person may or may not fit your mold,
Yeah, absolutely.
So as we know, the high intensity interval training is almost exclusively anaerobic, meaning that you burn blood glucose and stored muscle glycogen as your primary fuel source while you're doing that. And you can actually burn through the glycogen pretty quickly, depending on, a lot of things, but typically you tend to go through the stuff quick. And I know we've talked about this before, but your body will replace the glycogen through gluconeogenesis. Like if you don't eat any carbohydrate, your body will still replace that glycogen through gluconeogenesis, which is obviously the transformation of other substrates into glucose. So predominantly fatty acids and amino acids. And depending on your particular situation, how readily your body will release stored fat for, turning into glucose, or, for the process, so to speak. If you don't tend to mobilize fat very well, then you're probably going to be converting the majority of that gluconeogenesis is going to be converting amino acids. And depending on how much protein you're eating, that could be either from dietary protein sources or at the expense of your muscle tissue, right?
Right.
So this becomes more important the leaner you get. So as you get down into that, below 15% body fat range for men and below 20 to 25, depending on the woman, this is where this stuff can kind of start to become important, because you're now sort of walking that fine line of fuel substrates and trying to figure out which is going to fuel you best to maintain these sort of workouts, if that's what your goal is, right?
Right. So just for folks who aren't as familiar with what fatty acids and amino acids are, amino acids would be referring to protein or muscle or those kind of fuel sources.
Building
and
blocks,
yes, the building blocks, right? And fatty acids would be more like fat sources. So when Adam's talking about not being able to mobilize fat for the gluconeogenesis process or for restoring that glycogen, what he's saying is that you may start to actually burn down some of your muscle tissue.
Yeah, instead of getting body fat.
Exactly. So the whole thing behind this paleo concept and being low carb is that we can tap into our fat stores for fuel when we need it. And this would be one of those cases when we need it. But if you don't have a ton of body fat or you're not as metabolically flexible yet, it may be easier for your body to go in and grab something from protein or from muscle tissue.
Totally. And then also depending on your particular complex equation, it could even be just a calorie problem. Like you could be eating 200 too few calories a day. And now all of a sudden your body's going to store the fat and convert the amino acids. It becomes such a fine tinkering balance when you get, when you get right down to it.
Right.
So bottom line, high intensity exercise, which includes, so like the AMRAPs and all that stuff certainly fall into that category, but so do the strength training sessions. I mean, that's anaerobic movement. It's, kind of in the phosphocreatine pathway, but still anaerobic when you're, hitting your heavy squats. And even the body weight squats, especially if you're a beginner, you're burning through muscle glycogen,
Yeah. So, it's just interesting because this is when we start to realize that as you go through this process, and you guys have been with us for a while, you're starting to do these types of intense workouts. You do have to become a little bit more savvy and a little bit more aware of how you're nourishing yourself, how you're resting, and actually what pathway you're working in each workout. So this becomes a little bit more fine tuning for us as a group. And that's why we want to just keep going over and over it again, because as time goes on, you'll get more familiar with the terminology. You'll get more familiar with the kind of pathways you're working in, and you'll understand, am I fueling myself appropriately to get the end result that I'm looking for?
Yeah. It's like you're fine tuning your intuition. Because ultimately that's what we want. I mean, we don't want people to have to weigh and measure and count and track HRV and do all of this stuff all the time because, unless you thoroughly enjoy that, but we really want it to become an intuitive thing, but you have to tune it. The intuition is squirrely, so you have to kind of keep it tuned in a little bit.
Well, and in particularly when you're coming from a standard American diet, the intuition is off, especially if you think about the carb flu. The carb flu is telling you, dude, give me some freaking carbs. I can't, you're making me sick over here. You're starving me out. So it takes a while for your body to sort of come into a nice balance, and you can start to understand, like you said, you can fine tune that intuition and start to feel like, okay, this is what's going on with my body, and this is how I can feed it or work it or rest it in the correct way to keep it going in the direction I want. Yep.
Nailed it. So part of the way that we manage that to try to, account for and make it as simple as possible from the dietary perspective is that we keep the high intensity interval stuff like under 12 minutes. And 12 minutes, I don't know why, but just seems to be the magic number. Once you start to get beyond that, you really start to elicit pretty significant stress response above and beyond what is good for the adaptation. So remember this whole minimum effective dose idea, sub 12-minute AMRAP is kind of the minimum effective dose. You're going to get all of the good stuff, but a very small amount of the bad stuff, is the idea. So that's kind of why we do that. That's where the time limits and stuff are capped. So if you're following the program to a T, there shouldn't really be any issues there. But if you say for instance, you want to go do the tempo intervals, and we're starting to get higher in tempo intervals, right? Some of you guys may have noticed that depending on where you are with your resting heart rate, you could be up into the 18 to 20 repetitions, right? And so if you start to go and feel great some days, so you go out and charge those tempo intervals and say, you know what, I'm just going to do these as sprints instead. Now that volume at that intensity is starting to get sort of outside of what we're trying to get to. That makes sense, right? Right.
And this is actually something that I am very well known for doing. I know what the workout's intention is, and then I say, I don't really want to do that.
Well, especially if it's because I wrote it.
Yeah. Well, yes, there's always that factor. There is a
he
battle
doesn't know
of
what
the
he's
wills.
talking about.
He doesn't know.
He doesn't
I know what
me.
I need.
Yeah.
Well, no, it's true. And so with that in mind, it's like, okay, yeah, if one day you just feel really good and you want to just charge it and, you kind of go off the beaten path of what the intention of the workout is, it's not a big deal. Well, whatever. But it's when you consistently miss the interpretation and the reason behind each work day, because eventually you kind of pile all of your workouts into one category,
right,
or they all start to look sort of similar.
Yeah.
And we are really trying to create a variance in the way that we are working your body so that you can actually burn fat, get stronger, get leaner, do all that good stuff, which I think most of us are trying to do. Yes. Right.
Yeah. And exactly what Vanessa said is accurate. And what people tend to do when they start modifying, like, this seems a little intense, so I'm going to back off a little bit. This seems a little bit too or not intense enough, so I'm going to ramp it up. And where you wind up almost invariably is in that high to mid, kind of mid-high intensity world, which is sort of no man's land.
Right.
There's not a lot of good hormonal response for us. It's just not where we want to be. You're just draining your energy system. And that's ultimately where the adrenal fatigue stuff starts to really add up, right?
Well, and the thing is, a lot of us are looking for a certain feeling at the end of a workout. We want to feel that, oh, wow, I just got my butt kicked. It's sort of the CrossFit thing where it's like, I just got my butt kicked. I feel amazing. It's this flush of endorphins. Yeah. And it feels amazing. And it is addictive, just like anything else. We want to feel that adrenaline rush. We want to feel those endorphins because it gets us high. And trust me, I like to chase a dragon or two in my day, but at some point we have to really say, okay, it's exhaustive to our bodies unless we are really, really paying attention to how to feed and rest and refuel them. And then if we are just trying to get that high all the time, we're just feeding and resting and refueling for the next high.
Right.
We're not making fat loss or getting stronger of any of those things our main priority. We just want to get high again.
Right.
So, yeah.
And then you are probably starting to slip, just like all kinds of getting high. The rest of your life is starting to slip. You're spending all your time eating and training, not taking care of your kids, and pretty soon you're not bathing. It's a slippery slope.
Showers do take energy.
They do, and you get that whole time. It's the weightlifters model. Don't stand if you can sit.
Yeah, and there is this drought in California, so one more reason not to shower.
Yeah. Yeah, we're getting spun off pretty easy today, which is funny.
Yeah.
I like it. Okay.
Yeah, I like it too.
So, to bring it back around a little bit, this is kind of a dramatic oversimplification, but I want to try to help people understand. And then again, this comes back to exactly what Vanessa was just saying, not about the dragon chasing, but about the knowing the intent and being able to match the stuff up for yourself. So, like tempo intervals, for instance, those, you should feel better at the end of that than you did at the beginning. Like, if you are feeling horrible at the end of your tempo intervals, you probably went too hard. And that's what they're there for. They're there to elicit a little bit of a response to help you kind of get that up and down. You can get the sort of the same cardiac output kind of training in a shorter period of time than you could with steady state cardio. But the end result is that you should feel better. Right. And you may notice that we put them at the beginning of the workouts a couple of times here. They're a great way to warm up for it, almost like active recovery. Right. Mm-hmm. So in that model, feeling good at the end of the workout comes from a place of feeling refreshed, not from a place of being exhausted with like crazy endorphins. Right.
Right.
And then switch that over and let's look at the AMRAP on the opposite end of that, right? These partitioned AMRAPs are gnarly. You can go really hard for 3 minutes knowing that you've got a 4-minute rest coming up, right? Like the worst feeling workout I've ever done is a sub 3-minute Fran, and I think I was 2 minutes, 59 seconds and 59 hundredths or whatever, it was like barely even got there, but I was sick for 45 minutes, afterwards. So like in 3 minutes, you can really go hard, right? And that, so feeling good after an AMRAP looks like, as the nausea starts to fade, you start to feel better, right? And you're like, wow, This is awesome,
Right. And those are your days that you can chase the high, where you can just go all out and you can really get that rush and you can feed your
Amen.
craving. Yes.
Yeah.
and this is important though, because I think it's, we don't want to tell people that you don't ever want to feel that way. You always want this in between land. Like this is the day to go for it and to feel it and to go all in.
Yeah. And there should just be a stark contrast, right? I mean, they should be different things and they should feel like they're doing different things in your body,
Right.
Because they are, and then, and the one other thing I want to talk about with these is the jump squats. And I know that people are starting to enjoy them thoroughly. But I want to keep in mind or have you sort of keep in mind that if the sort of the measure for whether or not this is working is the speed of the jump. So if the speed of the jump is slowing to the point that, you're really kind of like super slow squat out of the bottom. And then as you get close to hip extension, you do a little foot kick to get off the ground, you're probably too heavy, right? So we want to keep those explosive and you shouldn't be too tanked at the end of them, right? We're trying to stay aerobic in there, is the entire point of them. Mm-hmm. So we're looking for speed and then full recovery before the next reps. So just a reminder on that. FYI. Okay, so back to carbohydrates and fat and whatnot. Okay, so this is an oversimplification, but let's just talk about when fats and carbohydrates are sort of used, right? So dietary fat is best burned at rest or during low intensity exercise. So this is when your body, because it takes a little bit longer, it's a very efficient process, but it takes a little bit longer to create ATP from fatty acids than it does from carbohydrates. So you can't create the energy as quickly. However, because fat is such a, sort of efficient fuel source, it can go for a long time. So we always think of dietary fat as sort of the endurance fuel. This is what you're running on when you're just sitting around. Your basal metabolic rate is burning up dietary fat. That's the idea.
Right. Like if you're an idle.
Yeah, when you're idling, and when you're idling all the way up to the point that you hit your anaerobic threshold, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, that's really where it's at. So it's a very broad spectrum that we can burn fat for fuel. And this is what we're training, right? This is what we're training in the tempo intervals. This is what we're training in the jump squats. We're trying to get to a point that we can burn more and more fat efficiently through a broader spectrum of our day, right? So if you, the opposite of that is the carbohydrate use, and that's really when you tap into that anaerobic threshold, where you can no longer produce ATP with oxygen. Now you're burning sugar. That's how it works. So you're burning sugar from your bloodstream and you're burning sugar from stored muscle glycogen. And now you're sort of into that spot. So the best fuel source for high intensity exercise and strength training is carbohydrate. And so whether that's something that you ingested prior to your workout, so it's circulating blood glucose, or you give yourself enough rest, you're super low carb and you give yourself, 2 to 3 days of rest to completely replete your glycogen stores before you hit another heavy strength session or something like that, right? It has to come from somewhere, I guess, is the point that I'm trying to make. That carbohydrate has to come from somewhere. It can be dietary fat that's being converted into glucose. It can be amino acids being converted into glucose, both of which are slow and energy intense processes, right? So if you're going to be training, heavy strength training and these anaerobic type of workouts, the best fuel source to do those efficiently and give your body what it needs to do it is going to come from carbohydrate.
Right.
And when we're picking our carbohydrates, if we can pick the thing closest to glucose that we can find, that's the better off, or, it's going to be a more efficient conversion, right, in your body. So as opposed to fructose, for instance, right? I mean, you can only store and utilize so much fructose. But glucose, on the other hand, I mean, that's basically what glycogen is a human starch that's predominantly glucose.
Right. And just for those of you out there who don't know the difference between fructose and glucose, fructose comes from things like fruit sugar. So, from fruit sources and that kind of thing. And glucose comes from something like a potato. So those are sort of the different types of sugars.
Totally. And, well, in natural food,
right, in natural food, right?
Yeah. In processed food, you get incredible loads of both glucose, sucrose, glucose, fructose, all engineered to taste amazing, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, and so from natural food sources, you're 100% correct. Stuff like white rice, white potatoes, sweet potatoes, squash, yams, like that kind of stuff has the kind of carbohydrate that we are looking for. And don't get me wrong, fruit is in for sure, but 1 to 2 pieces of fruit a day is about where you're that's about all the fructose you need, I guess, is really what it comes down to.
And especially, if we go back into sort of seasonal eating patterns, now would be the time that a little bit more fructose is appropriate for your body.
Yeah. Yeah. And the trick, and this is I think Robert Lustig has probably talked about this more than anyone. I think it's Dr. Lustig. He's a sugar guy, and he's a little off on a couple of things. I think in retrospect, there's a few things he's sort of taken as, I don't know, holds pretty high that I think some of the rest of science doesn't necessarily agree with. But the one thing I think is really important to recognize that he's very accurate on is fructose. And the only organ in our body that can use fructose is our liver, and it stores it as glycogen. And when it's full, if you continue to pile the fructose on, it stores the rest of it as fat in your liver or packs them into triglycerides and kicks it out into the bloodstream. So you can fill up on fructose really quickly, and it's sort of the last minute fuel tank for the glucose in your brain. So it doesn't get depleted very quickly, and it's really easy to overfill. So anyway, 1 to 2 pieces of fruit, good to go. Skip the agave nectar and all that stuff.
So this is another reason why, the folks out there who have a serious wine habit are really going to struggle overall with weight loss because, you can only, like Adam's saying, you can only use so much fructose. And if you're having 2 glasses, 3 glasses, a bottle of wine each night, there's just nowhere for all of that fructose to go.
Yeah.
So
totally,
you end up with an excess. There's no way for your body to utilize it. And we know a lot of folks like to have their glass of wine a night, and that's all good and fine. Maybe your body is, especially if you're not really taking in any other sources of fructose, maybe your body can process that just fine. But if you are the kind of person that does 2, 3, 4 glasses of wine on a regular basis, this is going to become a real issue for you.
Yeah, it certainly can. I mean, especially if you're not doing the kind of exercise that's going to deplete your liver glycogen,
right?
Which is intense, this is, like I said earlier, this is an oversimplification. I mean, there's a lot of other things going on, but these are sort of the talking points that I think will help kind of understand this.
And these are common themes. So these are things that we've seen a lot over the years. And I have seen over and over and over the wine issue with folks. And, it's actually, to be quite frank, it's been a reason that many folks have stopped wanting to coach with me or stopped training with me, because they simply want to have their wine and they want someone to tell them, how can I drink a bottle of wine every night and still lose weight? And, I'm sure there are ways that you can strip out. You can make the focus of your training stripping out your liver glycogen, but I don't think that's the healthiest way to live, for one. And for two, we've got to look at what's going on if you've got this kind of habit going on with alcohol consumption, which is a whole nother topic. But, know, it's been a line in the sand that many people have stopped training with me over. And I wish I had a better answer, but a bottle of wine a night doesn't work well.
Unless it, exactly. It just doesn't, unless it's working for you.
Yeah.
But in that case, you probably aren't here,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's a tricky one.
It is a tricky one. Yeah.
Yeah. So to circle back around, unless you are training, only low intensity and live a relatively sedentary lifestyle, then you're probably going to see some performance and health benefit from eating some carbohydrate. That's really, and when some we'll get into, a little bit more as we go along, but I really want to caution people against being completely all in on the zero carb, deal, especially if you're trying to put on some muscle, if you're trying to, increase your performance, lean out beyond where your body just seems to be happy. It's going to be really challenging to do without utilizing this tool that we have. And we know for a fact that if you do it right, that there's nothing wrong with carbohydrates. There's plenty of populations around the world that eat a predominantly carbohydrate diet, and they're relatively disease free. So what it comes down to is doing it correctly. And I think that's where we're really trying to get with this, is like carbohydrates are 100% appropriate for a lot of people. Let's just figure out how to get it to you,
Yeah. And the timing is really important. How does carbohydrate timing fit into your day? Yeah. If you start first thing in the morning with 2 white potatoes, that's probably not going to set you up for success for the day. Well, in terms of your cravings for more carbohydrates. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
but there are a lot of intelligent ways to place carbohydrate in your diet that, like Adam said, fuels you for your performance, gets your weight loss kicked into, it helps you to grab a gear and start to burn off a little stored fat that your body's very comfortable keeping. There's a lot of interesting nuances about carbohydrate and how we can use it to improve our overall picture.
Totally, especially when it comes to thyroid health and hormonal balance and, optimization of hormones and stuff. I mean, it's a tool, and we'd be remiss not to utilize it, for sure.
Absolutely.
So just generally speaking, what this means, though, is that people are going to perform better if they're training heavy and high intensities with some more carbohydrate.
Right. Right.
But if your goals, though, are aligned specifically with being low carb for one reason or another, you are following a ketogenic diet for the sake of doing it. Like this is what I want to do. I firmly believe that the less glucose burned, the better. And this is what I'm going to do. Then what you need to do is sort of modulate your training intensity to make sure that you're able to continue to recover.
Right. This would be the classic burning the candle at both ends, trying to stay ketogenic and trying to do this kind of workload that we're doing in Unveil Your Wellness. That would be antithetical to your health, as Mark Sisson would say. Yeah,
totally. And so if you are, aligned with that ultra low carb thing, and you're like, this is what I want to do, and I feel really good doing this, and you're not, training for the Olympics or whatever, then that is 100% cool. But you just need to, maybe hit us up and we can talk about how to modulate the exercise if you don't know, if you haven't really dialed that in for yourself in the past, like how we can kind of make some measures on that. You just can't do both for very long. 18 months seems to be the magic window. You go to a CrossFit gym and you look at the guys that have been there longer than 18 months, and the ones that are low carb paleos are broken. You just, it doesn't work long term.
Yeah, so, absolutely.
But here, we're more than happy to help you ratchet back the intensity of your exercise to match your goals.
Yeah. And I actually do this frequently. I'll just decide, you know what, I'm too busy, or there's too many things going on. I don't have a ton of time to worry about making my training a big focus. And I will go pretty low carb and low calorie and kind of just idle in that place for a while until I can ramp it back up. So this is something that you can bounce in and out of, and it's completely fine. It's just about understanding how to feed with what you're working with every time.
Yep. It's tools.
Tools in the shed.
Tools in the shed, so to speak.
Yep.
So that being said, regardless of kind of what route you're going, it's important to kind of understand that you need to pick one route, on a daily basis for sure, and even sort of on a weekly basis. And what I mean by that is that, we're always going to eat enough protein and enough essential fatty acids and micronutrients through eating, lean animal proteins and as many like dense, low starch kind of vegetables as we can stomach. That's a given, right? That's what we're eating. Now, so then beyond that, it becomes like what you would call like your fuel substrates, right? So we're going to eat this lean protein and all these veggies, but then are we going to get our added fuel from fat, or are we going to get our added fuel from carbohydrate? And my contention is that it should be one or the other on an individual meal basis, probably, and certainly on a daily basis. So depending on what we were talking about earlier. So if it's a low intensity sedentary day, then dietary fat is going to be the better fuel source. If it's a high intensity strength training gnarly day, then higher carbohydrate is probably going to be a better fuel source, right? So it's just one or the other, and it's dependent on what you're doing that day and what your long-term goals are.
Right. And, one thing to throw in here is that what becomes tricky is that we all start to eat very high fat because that becomes sort of the default setting. So when you do start adding some additional carbohydrate back in, a lot of times you'll still have a really high fat ratio because just by default, that's how we cook. That's how we eat. That's, we slather everything in butter. We're just kind of like, this is our go-to setup. So if you have high carb and high fat, that's a perfect formula for weight gain.
Yeah, that's how you get big.
Yeah, so this is the contention that Adam's trying to make is you have to pick a pathway for what you are training in that day. So if, like he said, you're training a heavy strength day, then you might want to ratchet back the fat a little bit. Instead of slathering your potato or whatever fuel source you use for your carbohydrate, instead of slathering it in butter, you may go light on the butter for the night and just kind of make sure that you get the good carbohydrate replenishment as the main fuel source.
Yep. Yeah, because at the end of the day, even eating the cleanest possible foods in the best possible situation, it still does take a caloric deficit, in order for things to work out in the in order to continue fat loss. A very small caloric deficit, yet there needs to be one. So just adding carbohydrate on top of the fat and protein of a normal dinner is not necessarily the best way to approach it, and not what we're recommending.
Right.
Okay, so fat plus carbohydrate plus all the rest of everything, generally speaking, is going to equal fat gain for most people. So just keep that in mind moving forward. And while we're on the topic of carbohydrate, so the question becomes how much carbohydrate to eat. And I think for our program, so for folks who are down to the point that they're like, hey, you know what? I think I probably fit into this category that we've been talking about, where I'm getting relatively lean. I'm not, one way or the other, I'm not just trying to be low carb for the sake of being low carb. Maybe I'll try a little bit of this carbohydrate business out. How much do you actually eat? And I think that for our program, I think that somewhere between 2 and 3 grams per kilogram of lean mass is not a bad idea on a daily basis. So like for me, that's like, 160 to 320, I think, something like that, grams of carbohydrate, depending on, the kind of training that I'm doing. So for a pretty heavy, gnarly strength day, so let's say, well, just use me as an example here, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Monday and Wednesday, I probably eat somewhere around 160 to 175 grams of carbs. Friday, I eat closer to 300. And that's just how it works for me, and for a couple of reasons. One, earlier in the week, I've still, the workouts are, they're pretty spicy, but I've had a nice weekend to recover, all that kind of stuff. Wednesday, same thing. Friday, I know that it's been a long week of training. I might need to, just kind of ramp things up a little bit. And then I'm also building up glycogen stores to get me through the weekend, right? So I'll eat a little bit more.
Right. And, one thing to consider for folks is just, when you're refeeding or when you're adding that extra carbohydrate. For the most part, I still keep my mornings low carbohydrate and pretty free of any kind of intense carbohydrates. Maybe I'll do a kale shake or something along those lines, but trying to partition your carbohydrate later in the day is going to keep you in that nice, even steady glucose, sort of stable blood sugar level that will help stave off any kind of cravings. Right. So that's how I game it. And I know that's typically how you game it too, right? You keep your breakfast carb free. Yeah,
totally. And, so it kind of gets you that, or at least in theory, it gets you the best of both worlds scenario, right? Where you still have that, potentially, depending on, your overall protein intake, you're a little bit ketosis in the morning, after your fast, so to speak, while you're asleep at night. Maybe you're not, but one way or the other, you're giving your body some portion of the day that it's not continually, producing insulin and chasing blood sugar around. And I think that there's definitely some benefit to that. And we know for sure that putting the majority of your carbohydrate, all other things being equal, putting the majority of your carbohydrate in your evening meal leads to fat loss over the long term. So,
right.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Yep. Later in the day is the answer for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So hopefully that is reasonable information.
Yeah, I mean, this is a lot of information, especially for folks who are either brand new to even getting going on this stuff. And for those of you out there that are like, whoa, you lost me. I'm just trying to get through the workouts and, I'm just moving through things. Honestly, don't overthink this stuff. Don't worry about it. Just keep moving, keep wheeling your way through this stuff. The only thing I would say is if you, once again, are dealing with really intolerable sugar cravings at some point, that's a red flag that you might need to add a little bit extra carbohydrate in, because those sugar cravings are your body's way of saying, I don't have the kind of fuel source that I need to support the workload that you're giving me.
Right. And that's once you're past the carb flu. So once you've been low carb and you no longer have sugar cravings on a regular basis, then now this is kind of like what we're talking about with the fine tuning of your intuition, right? Like once you are relatively free of all of those sort of cravings and stuff like that, then you can start to listen to them as like, oh yeah, my body's actually asking me for something.
Yeah. And the thing is, if you have those really intense sugar cravings, a lot of time, especially if you're trying to stay really low carb, you'll end up taking in more calories because you're thinking, okay, I'm still hungry for some reason. I'm going to eat a little extra fat and protein. And so you'll end up actually consuming more calories, but those calories aren't actually feeding the pathway that you need to replenish. So I know that personally, I did this forever back when we were CrossFitting all the time. I would be like, oh, I'm still starving. Let me eat, a handful of macadamia nuts and some chicken. And I would eat like another 600 calories, but I wasn't any more satisfied. And I certainly wasn't helping myself to actually lose any more additional fat by overfeeding myself.
Or necessarily even recover from the workouts. That was like,
exactly.
We were in the performance days. It's so crazy because I look back now and I'm like, oh my gosh, how did we miss this? Because it's not like the science is new. You know what I mean? Like people will have understood the glycolytic energy pathway for a long time. We just ignored it.
I think it's part of just this, our tendency as folks to get really excited about a diet, and about a certain way of living or eating is the right way to live and it's a better way. And now we know something that we didn't know before. But ultimately, like we've been eating carbohydrates our entire existence. This is not a new fuel source. Right. It's just that we went a little too crazy on the donuts for a while, people. So, it's not about getting away from using that third fuel source that's been with us since the beginning of time. It's about how to use it more in alignment with our genetic predisposition and with our training goals.
Bam. I feel like that we could just wrap the entire podcast with what you just said. I think it's been like an hour of babbling to try to just come up with that.
Yeah. Cool. Well, it's really hard. This is complex stuff, and we're speaking to a large audience about things that ultimately are very specific to each individual. So it gets tricky, and we're trying to cover a lot of material in a very broad way, and hopefully not just go confuse everybody, and everyone's like, what the heck are we even talking about anymore?
Who are these people? Yeah. So with that, we should probably stop talking about that. But what I do want to cover, though, before we jump off is just some signs and symptoms, right? Some things to look for with regard to overtraining and overreaching and sort of burnout, right? And so usually one of the first things to happen is you'll notice that your sleep quality starts to get bad. Like you don't sleep well throughout the night. You have a hard time falling asleep, and you don't wake up feeling rested. And that's a classic sign of overtraining. Your body's just not, and it seems sort of counter, right? Because it seems like if you're beat up and you need more recovery, that you would sleep better, but you don't. I mean, it has to do a lot with your adrenal system, but poor sleep quality is probably step one. Like that's where you start to see things go sideways. Then I think it's a tie between feeling like low mental energy, like you just don't have the RAM to think about more than, 2 or 3 things at a time. And the fourth thing just gets really irritating. Like that is another sign, right? And then somewhere in there is sugar and salt cravings, like we were talking about before. Once you're tuned into those things, sugar and salt, those are 2 things your body's like, hey, we are lacking here. High resting heart rate. So if you've been tracking your heart rate and all of a sudden it's 5 or 10 points higher than normal in the morning, then you know that your body's having to do a little bit of extra work and it's not recovering well. Low HRV scores, so your heart rate variability is low, which means that you're operating in predominantly sympathetic nervous system drive, which means you're not recovered. And then that translates to a low desire to train. Like you're not excited about working out. You may even dread working out. Like that is your body that's your body's stress response manipulating your behavior to get you to rest. Like when you think about it from that perspective, you start to go, oh, wow, this system is,
Yeah, it's very intelligent. It's the same as the sugar cravings. I mean, you'll have dreams of donuts for a reason.
Yeah. Totally.
And, one other note on the low mental energy is that can also sort of display itself as a little bit of depression, almost like you're bummed out, you're sort of sad. And I totally have this when I am super low carbohydrate and I'm a little exhausted, overtrained, whatever. I'll just be so sad.
Yeah.
I feel so sad. And then I'm like, I eat some carbohydrate and I'm like, what do you know? I feel way better. All of a
sudden everything's better. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that, there's like or at least for me anyway, there's like a feeling that shouldn't be the case. I'm like, oh, I must not be doing something right because I shouldn't be this much of a slave to carbohydrate when this and this and this is going on. But man, I'm telling you, your brain chews through the glucose. When you're stressed out and when there's all this stuff going on, your brain just eats it up. And yes, your brain, I think all but 2 kinds of cells in your brain can burn ketones, instead of glucose. But the reality of it is that glucose is the quickest fix. It's like our brains have been burning this stuff for a long time, and it's not, I'm not convinced that it's 100% bad, that they continue to do that.
No, not at all. In fact, I think that, it's probably just a natural part of the way that we've been fueled forever and should continue to be fueled.
Yeah, as needed. Speaking of the brain fueling, though, on a little bit of a tangent here, I bought some of the Keto Sports Keto Force, which is a salt and potassium beta hydroxybutyrate, which is basically pure ketones. And it was something that Dr. D'Agostino had been talking about. He's a ketosis and cancer and epilepsy researcher. And he helped this company design this supplement. And I have to tell you, that stuff is remarkable. Like the brain power speed. I mean, I have a prescription for modafinil, which is an allergen. I've taken just about every kind of nootropic that's either somewhat legal, you can buy it in Russia, or whatever, like anything I can get my hands on to kind of help speed up mental acuity and just kind of give you some of that brain power. Hands down, a glass of this stuff mixed in with some lime juice, because it's really basic, so you need to mix it with some something acidic. And for like 3 hours, you're just in full go mode, and not like jittery caffeine stimulant, but that full, if you've ever had the feeling of being in ketosis, that brain clarity and that mental RAM fire up, it's like that times 10. It's crazy.
I'm going to have to try that.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I'm still not 100% certain what exactly I will continue to use it for. I've used about half the bottle so far, trying out different things, just having some in the morning, having some pre-workout. And I have to say that for the workout component, I mean, I know the science says that the elevated ketone levels, especially at the level of blood ketones you're able to get from this kind of supplement, that your body should be a lot more oxygen efficient, which means that you would be able to, lift heavier weights while still being using less oxygen, right? So you get less lactic acid or lactate production and all that. Right. I don't know. Like I don't know. Maybe not for me. Like I just felt like I was hungry during my workouts, I mean, my brain was all ramped up, and I was like, okay, yeah, I'm motivated, but I was hungry. Yeah. So I'm not sure about that part, but talk about the mental clarity component is worth it all by itself. Give that stuff a shot, try it out. And then I think the other place I think it could probably be pretty beneficial is if you were, wanting to transition into a super low carb period for a period of time, which is kind of what Dr. Thomas Seyfried talks about for the ketogenic diet as a cancer prevention tool. He talks about spending, what was it, like 3 or 4 days a year? I mean, it was not very much, maybe a week a year.
I have a week in my mind.
A week, like a week a year in deep ketosis. Mm-hmm. And I think for that, that stuff's money, because what'll end up happening is you'll artificially raise your beta hydroxybutyrate levels to far beyond where most people are going to get through diet alone. And you don't necessarily have to go super high fat and zero carb, low protein. Because if anybody's tinkered with that, that's a challenge in and of itself to actually get your blood ketones up to a respectable level just through diet. And I think this is kind of a slick hack for that. So
right. Advanced living.
Interesting stuff. Yeah, but it's super high. I mean, it is a sodium potassium blend, so the balance is there, but it's some salty business. So you'll retain a little bit of water. But interesting stuff. Yeah,
interesting. Cool. I'll have to try it. Perhaps. On a day I don't mind being puffy.
Yeah. Yeah. Or for like 2 days. It's kind of the way that it looks. But yeah, it's interesting stuff. Me. Yeah, Keto Force, you can get it from Prototype Nutrition. They're they have one called Keto Canna, which is keto calcium and sodium, and then the other one's potassium and sodium. And I opted for the potassium sodium because
I did.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I think that wraps up this week's podcast. We rambled on for long enough, I feel. How about you?
Yeah, I think so. Thoroughly confusing.
Everyone, congratulations on wrapping week 2. We're headed into week 3, and hopefully you've had a productive and successful month so far. And we look forward to wrapping it up with you guys next week.
Yeah, totally. Oh, and I am going to change. We're going to keep the pull-up practice in as an optional thing going into next month, but I'm going to switch it up a little bit, try to make it a little more approachable. So you guys have that to look forward to, which is awesome.
Awesome. All right, guys. Have a great rest of your weekend, and we'll talk to you next week.
Bye.
Bye.
And I don't think I would be me without you being you. Your direction, expression, intention has taken